Vibha, thank you so much, Mr. Chan. Enhance their skills and expertise in teaching for last 22 years. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for our panelists this evening.
Check. Good afternoon and a warm welcome to all my colleagues. We have with us 3 members in leadership positions across different schools. The topic that we've been asked to discuss today, and we'd like to take a little bit of a different approach on the topic. The topic that we have today is the lack of autonomy in education, and is this the main cause as to why Indian education suffers globally? I welcome all the panelists. Thank you so much for being with us, and I'm sure the audience is looking forward to hear your perspective. We're going to address 3 different perspectives as we go through, and we'll turn to the audience at some point to also share your thoughts. We'll begin with their perspective on what do they think of autonomy to begin with. I'll turn to Nirav.
Right. I think the topic that we had while we were discussing just before the session, there is lots that can be said under what autonomy implies at different grade levels, starting from primary, all the way up to even going beyond K-12 and higher education as well. Just to get the ball rolling, if I were to put it in very simple terms, as an educationist, what autonomy means to me is the freedom to run my institution the way I would like to run it. If I were to drill down to one level lower, it could range from the choice of the curriculum or the way in which you would like to impart education to children. Right? It could look at the way in which you would like to go about building your team, the way in which you would like to hire people. Also, if we are looking at competing with the best in the world, because that's a part of the topic as well. Autonomy to innovate as and when I feel it necessary. I think that's a very important part if we have to keep the pace with some of the best institutes globally. The innovation that is going on in teaching and learning and in technology mandates that we continuously look at what we are doing and innovate. And autonomy to do that is something I think every educationist would vouch for.
Anjum, same question. Your perspective on autonomy.
I think Nirav summed it up pretty well. So without sounding redundant, I would say that being in a democracy and having an education system that is to do well for not only the country, but for Indians globally, I think that we need a lot of choices in terms of what language we can teach, what curriculum we can follow, what type of teachers we would like to have, what type of training for the teachers we would like to have, what resources. And with all the variants that we have in our country, India being a pluralistic society, I think we need those choices. We need those, we need to have a broad framework, otherwise it would probably become very confusing. But within that large general framework, we should have the autonomy to have choice in how we would like to teach and what we would like to teach.
Dr. Kanna?
Good afternoon, everybody. First and foremost, we have gotten used to a system that has been there from decades, I would say centuries, wherein a group of handful of people actually controlling the whole system, and we have continued with it, unfortunately. So when you look at the autonomy that we are needing today, people who were there from other country who were actually ruling over our education system needed something for what they were doing, and a handful of them were controlling the whole millions of Indians who were here, teaching them the way we wanted to learn, or they needed us to learn. Unfortunately, that's the same thing that is continuing. As Anjum and Nirav actually put it as, there is a broad framework definitely required today, but in my opinion, there has to be an autonomy given to each institution to some extent and each child to some extent at that level also, wherein education becomes purposeful. when I say autonomy, control leads to compliance. Everybody will do what has been told. But autonomy definitely leads to engagement. There is an engagement, there is an ownership when you give that particular freedom to either a teacher or a child or the school to teach the way you need to. I think that should be the way that we are looking forward to, and that's my perspective about autonomy.
Thank you so much. We're going to head into the second question. When we talk about autonomy and we talk about regulation, a lot of times we think regulation is necessarily a bad thing, and we think regulation limits us or shackles us. I'd like to hear from the fellow panel members, when we talk about autonomy, is it a right or is it a choice? Should it be a right or should it be a choice?
So, this topic got me thinking, and I did a little bit of research. I would like to ask the audience a question or two before I answer this bit. Since the topic says that we are looking at the best systems or education systems globally, which countries do we think have the best systems globally? Singapore.
So Singapore,
Finland is one I hear.
Finland,
Please. UK. Very good moral education system, true. Anybody else? India? Okay, right. So,
Finland.
yeah,
I think Finland
the
comes
answers, I think that shows that our audience is very well read. Most of these companies did figure in the top 10. And if we look at what kind of education system they adopt, is it completely autonomous? What do we mean by lack of autonomy? For this discussion, let's assume it's a lot of government regulation or regulation of any other kind as well, which kind of dictates how education happens. Surprisingly, you take Singapore, you take Finland, though they have very different ways about going about their education, they are very, very heavily regulated in the way education can happen. So lack of autonomy per se, that was my reflection and realization, is not necessarily the single biggest impediment towards achieving global best performance. Does improved autonomy help in the hands of right educationists? Yes, definitely. What was common to a lot of these systems is setting up of goals, whether it is regulated or autonomous, and ensuring accountability towards achieving those goals, right? So autonomy with accountability, I think that should be the choice for everyone going forward. Just autonomy for the sake of it, I don't think that's taking us down the right path, because a pluralistic country like India, we have people across spectrum. I think Anjum referred to that in the beginning. We are talking about competing at a global level when 25% of our population is not even literate. So definitely there has to be a very strong framework in place to improve the basic standards that need to be improved. But at the other end of the spectrum, while we are looking to compete globally, autonomy definitely is required. That's what I'd say.
Dr. Kanna?
I agree with Nirav there. What happens exactly is, in current scenario, probably the regulation that has to be the regulation that comes from the board has to be updated. It should be the one that is relevant to today's context. In case we are looking at autonomy that actually allows us without any kind of guidelines, will definitely go haywire. That's what I feel. Because there has to be a guideline for every school and every teacher as to this is going to be the outcome that we expect from you. Of course, whatever you want to do to achieve this goal is left to you. The way you want to do, you can do it. That's what we are probably looking at. I'll give you one small example here. I was talking to a professor of an engineering college who actually told me that, ma'am, do you remember floppy disk? I said, yes, I do. Then he told me, you and I have seen it. But my children have studied about the floppy disk for 5 years without seeing it, and they've been writing exam on it. And it took me 5 years to eject that floppy disk from the syllabus of the textbook. And then in spite of writing so many times, the changes did not happen. You and I agree that there are a lot of things in whichever board we are talking about which is obsolete already. If we do not have that kind of autonomy, it pains when you see that each government, when it comes in, will mandate a particular language that has to be taught. Is it practical? Do you think it's going to work? And children will be learning things that are not required and will not learn what is relevant to today's education. So such guidelines have to be given thought, and then some flexibility to a particular school, student, parent, or teachers to choose. Pick and choose what is relevant to the current market, or how we are bringing up our children, what is the 20th century skills. Those options have to be given, and that is the autonomy I am actually looking for.
Anjum?
I think I'm just going to go with my first answer, just about democracy, choice, lot of variance. I mean, so it is a right, and we do need choices, for the betterment of the citizens of the country and for all types, whether it's urban, rural, all the different. Can it be a system? We basically can't measure the end of what the children are going to pass through with the same yardstick. It's going to vary from the villages to the metros. And I think that in the broad framework, you have to be able to provide something for everyone.
Thank you. No, skipped ahead. In the context of our institutions, both in the early years when we talk about the lower secondary and we talk about high school as well, a lot of emphasis for us when we talk about autonomy comes in the context, like you said, Nirav, in the way we run our institutions, the freedom of choice with the curriculum. And Anjum, like you mentioned, every institution, given their context, be it in an urban environment or be in a rural environment, their context is different. For those children, their perspective and their success is measured differently. The professions they're going to go into are probably also different. When we look at the context of India, and as you mentioned, being a very pluralistic society, how do we as institutions look at professional autonomy in the context of student achievement? Nirav?
I think since this is a topic that's very close to Anjum's heart, she should lead. I'll just pitch in.
Sure. Could we put in the other presentation, please?
Until then, would you like to elaborate on that? Until my slides are up.
Definitely we need to look at a possibility of having different segments, as we all have been talking about. It is a choice that the school or the requirement of the student that makes relevance in terms of autonomy. Any school or any college, probably in different states, will have a different kind of requirement. And depending upon that, they can look at the kind of students who flow in, whether it's going to be a vocational course that is required for the segment, if it is a rural school, or somebody who is interested in doing it, or it is a school which is preparing children to go abroad and then, take up courses in different universities. So depending upon the requirement of the children and also the need of the day, we need to ensure that those choices are made by the school itself, and we need to have an autonomy to pick and choose that. In case I would like to offer French and not Kannada, very controversial, I'm not meaning anything here, the child should be able to pick that up, and the school should have the liberty to offer that along with whatever is the mandatory thing. I think we are more doing things just for documentation purpose, and also because it has been asked, like, we have to submit, these are the things you have to do, and you have no choice but doing it. That is what has to go. That rigidity has to go, and there has to be a flexibility. I request Anjum to go ahead and talk about her thing.
Okay, I think there's a problem with putting up the other presentation because I thought the slides would actually help explain it to the audience a little bit better. But I'll go ahead and start. So the last part of the panel topic was, does lack of economy, do the Indian students suffer globally because of that? So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. When we look at the context of navigating education in the 21st century, now more than ever before do we have Indians studying abroad all over the world. We have Indians that are doing very, very well. You know, we have a lot of examples, like the CEO, the head of Microsoft, among others. And they are part of the Indian system. Now, what I'd like to suggest is that we need to think beyond the board and what type of board the child is going to take, which is better. And I also think that as educationists, we should not really give our power away in the sense that this is not what we're not allowed to do this, or we're not allowed to do this. Let's work on what is within our circle of influence. Because within the context of the power that we have within our schools, within our institutions, we're not doing nearly enough. Most of the schools in the country are not understanding our students the way that they need to be understood. We're not understanding the type of future that is filled with uncertainty that we need to be preparing our children for. And I think that when we can focus on how our students will fare globally in the future, that is a great way to start. And for that, I would just talk about the 5 C's. This is something that, how many of you have heard of the 5 C's of the 21st century? Can you raise your hand? Okay, so about like 10, 12 of you, I see hands up. So basically, if we can look at that, because communication, and now we know that with digitization, how much communication has even transformed. So it's not just how we can speak and how we can communicate in writing, but it's also about how we can communicate in other ways. So communication is one of the C's of the 21st century. How are we developing that? The government is not taking away any privilege that we have, or they're not regulating that. And there's so much that we need to do in terms of, how our kids can communicate effectively. Collaboration. I don't think that there's enough experiential sort of opportunity given to our children for collaboration, for building collaboration skills. Because the workforce nowadays, they require people to work in a team, people to synthesize ideas, to work together. They may not even be in India. They might get recruited to a different office in a different part of the world. So how is it that they are going to have those soft skills of communication and collaboration? The other thing is creativity. I think a lot of the traditional school systems, we're ignoring the right brain. We're ignoring creativity. And that is really, really key. With the fast pace of how change is taking place nowadays, the rapid changes, we need kids that can think out of the box. Because 10 years ago, we didn't have things like social media. 5 years ago, you didn't have the things that we're seeing right now. Uber, Airbnb, just so many things are happening, with technology. So can the kids, how can we nurture that creativity? How can we teach them to think out of the box and to be prepared to face that uncertainty that is going to be there in the future with things rapidly changing, industries completely changing? The other C is critical thinking skills. So I think in India, we were very much a society that was very good at memorizing information for decades, right? Memorizing and then regurgitating on an exam. That's no longer the case because information is exponentially increasing. So it's not really about how much information we've memorized up here, it's about what we can do with that information. How can we apply it, synthesize it, analyze it, create something new from it, put a different twist to it, have paradigm shifts with some information that we have at our fingertips. And the 4 C's are these, but I would also like to add a 5th C, which is character. The character development, values, this is something, according to Vygotsky, who's a cultural social psychologist, we, the adults in the environment of the child, are the only ones that can actually share culture, transfer culture. It's not going to happen through technology. So the way we develop values, the way we develop character is really important. So I would say that if schools can empower themselves to deliver at least these 5 C's for the 21st century, I think that our children will excel globally. So that's what I'd like to say, and this is beyond, regulation. I mean, no one's stopping us from doing this, and this is probably our most primary duty. And the other is just understanding our students, understanding how the brain learns. Sometimes we have a lot of teachers who don't even understand child psychology, how the child learns cognitively, how do they remember, what stays in long-term memory. And that's something that, brain-based learning is a buzzword. And I think that we all need to keep updating our teachers with these things.
Sure.
My time's up, so I'm going to have...
Thank you so much. And I think you bring up a valid point for us as educators, the responsibility to provide children with not just the 4 C's, but the 5th C, with character. And that is agnostic to our situation, be it an urban context or be it a rural context. It is something that I think for us as educators, regulation or board does not stand in the way of us enabling these character traits or these dispositions in our children. I would like to thank our panelists. A few takeaways. We talked about the autonomy to innovate, and I think the autonomy to innovate is extremely important, and that comes back to what Anjum was saying. And given a framework, being a pluralistic society, having the opportunity of choice within a framework is something that is really relevant given the context of India and how diverse and vast it is. With this, I would like to thank all of you as an audience for listening to us. I'd like to thank all the panel members. I apologize, we are short of time and we don't have time to take questions, but I'm sure our panel members will be available and we would be happy to take any questions on the side. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Saad, for moderating the complete panel out here. With this, may I request Mr. Vineet from NTAP to kindly join us on the stage to felicitate our panelists. Thank you so much once again. And may I request Mr. Vineet to kindly join us on the stage, please. To start with, we have Mr. Saad amongst us. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Mr. Saad. Next, we have Mrs. Anjum amongst us. Next, we have Mrs. Dakshayini. And, of course, Mr. Nirav amongst us. At the same time, we would like to give the awards to Glendale Academy, besides Sansari, Hyderabad, Telangana, for India's Best School Jury Choice Award. May I request Mr. Vineet to kindly stay back and... Yes, please. We'll have a group picture. Thank you so much, Mrs. Anjum. Next, we have a Vikas Bharati Public School, Sector 24, Rohini.